We greatly appreciate your valuable time and kind interest in the event today, titled Empathy, a Project Management Superpower. Our valued speaker, Dev Ramcharan, was one of our top presenters during our annual summit, Project Explorer, in 2021, with a topic on emotional intelligence. During his workshop back then, he presented us with real-life situations we could relate to and put ourselves in the shoes of the project manager experiencing the situation. Empathy, as one of the elements of emotional intelligence, is often considered as an easy skill to understand and apply. We described it as a soft skill. In reality, it seems one of the hardest things to learn while keeping our authenticity and sincere connection with the person we try to understand. Here are some housekeeping rules. We'll have about a 45 minutes presentation followed by a 30 minutes Q&A session. You can put your questions in the chat and Dev will answer them by the end of his presentation. Close to the end of the event today, I'll put a link to our survey and to the PDU claim form. We greatly value your feedback and would love to hear what you think about the event. Last but not least, I would like to extend our gratitude to our monthly events sponsor, SoftServe. The work of PMI Bulgaria chapter and its members are further generously supported by our sponsors Atos, Companize, ScaleFocus, and Telelink. Without further ado, I give the word to Dev. Dev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And thank you, every one of you who's actually logged into this meeting today. I hope that some of the principles that we talk about will be useful to you in your career and just in your life in general. Now, when we ask ourselves about things like emotions and empathy and so on and so forth, are these things important? Well, some might say, no, they're not that important. And really what we need to do is focus on facts, on numbers, on details, on outcomes, on benefits that are going to be delivered in the work that we do in our projects and programs and portfolios. And we should really just be thinking in terms of what is the strategic impact going to be of everything that we do. Nothing else matters. Now, the fact of the matter is that kind of thinking may actually be available or may be around in some places, but it's very Just checking, can you all hear me now?
Yes.
All right, good. Somehow I went on mute there for a second. So that old school thinking that is available in many places in the world and in many industries just focuses on numbers, the mathematical, measurable aspects of the workplace. But what we've come to see as time has gone by and advanced research has been done on the impact of emotions in the workplace is that emotions are highly impactful. We have emotional responses to stress, to change, to work that feels overwhelming, to positive experience and negative experiences in the workplace. Teams that have some kind of emotional gap, that are demotivated, that have a plummet in their morale, do not deliver. Neither do individuals who are experiencing those kinds of things. And you might ask yourself the question, well, if that's true in this age of COVID and the impact of the pandemic on all of us, well, we must be in pretty big trouble because of the impact to our emotions. And the answer to that question, if you were to ask it as a question, would be yes, there have been some major impacts, but at the same time, there are ways that we can get through the struggles and the challenges that actually come with the impact of COVID in our workplaces and on us psychologically and emotionally. We've all experienced a sense of being down, of having low energy, of having a sense of disorientation. And for many of us that are now starting to go back to the workplace, there's an even bigger sense of overwhelm and disorientation as we get ourselves realigned with the usual workplace that we're accustomed to but which many of us have not really been in for over 2 years. Empathy is the ability to relate to other people. It doesn't mean you think precisely the way they do. It does not mean that you are able to read their minds and think their thoughts, but it means that you are able to make use of your imagination as a human being and to imagine yourself into the world, into the real circumstances of the individuals that you interact with, either in your personal life or in your professional life. And what I'd want to propose to you as part of this presentation today is this. Empathy is not just a skill. It's not just an attribute a person might have or a characteristic or something that they develop over time. Empathy is actually an absolute superpower in project management. So we should look at this. And at the end, if you're not convinced, no problem. If you are convinced, then what we can start doing as professionals is not just know that empathy is important, but practice the skills around developing and deepening this particular tool set that we refer to as empathy. So what is empathy? We should start things off with some kind of an understanding of how it's defined. And there may not be one single authoritative absolute definition, but there are a few good definitions that are out there. And we'll look at a definition that is by Daniel Goleman in a few minutes. Step back for a minute and just think about this reality. The world that we live in is filled with people we don't know anything about. And we need to be able to understand each other to some degree to be able to interact well, to work together well, and to have warm and strong relationships. The people that are around us have different backgrounds to us. They think differently to us. Their values, their experience of life, their levels of maturity, the things that they want for themselves, their cultural backgrounds, and their languages sometimes are different to ours. We learn to see the world through the eyes of others when we use and develop our empathy. So think about it as a pair of glasses that we put on that help us to see more clearly who other people are, where they've been, what they struggle with, and how we can help and work with them effectively. Empathy is about all of those things. Well, what is it? Wikipedia says that empathy is the capacity. Now stop and think there for a minute. It's not the talent. It's not something you're born with. It is a capacity that you develop. And it's the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from within their frame of reference, not yours. That is the ability to place yourself in someone else's position or shoes. You look at somebody, you see a person who is sitting in a meeting and they're angry. And you ask yourself in a few seconds in your mind, why is she angry? And then you reflect on that person and where they've come from over the last couple of years, the struggles they've had, the disappointments they've had to deal with, the challenges for progress in their career, the fact that she may have been passed over twice, and in at least one of those circumstances, it was unfair when she was passed over for an opportunity. And now people around the table are talking about individuals in the organization being given the chance to progress and to be able to build their careers and to see promotions in the company. Well, if you see anger on her face and you ask yourself where that is coming from, and you put yourself in her shoes, you can easily understand why she might be feeling that. It's a response that's based on her disappointment, on those ambitions she had that may have been crushed in the organization through poor leadership, or sometimes through people just being ignorant of what she needed and hoped to be able to accomplish because they just didn't bother to ask her. Empathy is your having the chance to think deeply about someone else's situation or circumstance, to be able to then understand and interpret their emotional responses, and to be able to relate to them in a way that is positive, as opposed to looking across the table, seeing someone angry, and making a judgment call on that person, saying, I don't know why she's angry, but that's just stupid. And sometimes we do that by a superficial assessment of circumstances, of people, and of situations without reflecting deeply on what may be going on inside of them. So we want to develop that skill. We want to develop that capacity, that ability to understand or feel what other people are feeling, even though they may be very, very different to us. Daniel Goleman, in his book, Working with Emotional Intelligence, defines empathy this way. Empathy is our social radar. Lacking such sensitivity, people are off. If you don't have a feel for other people, if rapport with other people is not important to you, if you don't care how other people feel or even bother to consider how they may feel about actions, words, or decisions that you're accountable for, you might be off, misaligned with everyone else, and a little bit remote from the reality of what's really happening around you. Goleman says being emotionally tone deaf leads to social awkwardness, whether from misconstruing feelings or through a mechanical, out of tune bluntness or indifference that destroys rapport. And at the heart of developing empathy is a desire to have the skill to be able to develop rapport with other people, a connection to other people, a positive, constructive connection that allows you to work with them in a way that is going to have good results. So empathy builds rapport. No empathy, no rapport. Rapport is absolutely crucial for positive social interactions, both in the workplace and with people that we care about. If we have no rapport with them, we are going to be not only awkward, off, and out of tune, but we're actually going to do significant damage to the relationships that we have around us. Sometimes we don't even realize the impact we have on other people because we never take the time to consider how we come across from their perspective. We don't develop the self-awareness to admit our weaknesses, our frailties, those areas that we need to continue to work on to mature and to become more proficient at. And that's a problem that many people have in the world in which we're living today. And one of the worst forms that this lack of rapport, this lack of empathy can take is when we look at people as stereotypes, cardboard characters. That person is this background, therefore they are A, B, C, end of story. By looking at people at in that way, using that kind of a flawed model of interpretation, seeing people as stereotypes, we fail to see the uniqueness, the potential, the richness, the value that people have and can add to our circumstances, to our jobs, to our projects, to our lives in general. Goleman says at the very least, empathy requires being able to read another's emotions. At a higher level, it involves sensing and responding to a person's unspoken concerns or feelings. And at the highest level, empathy is understanding the issues or the concerns that lie behind another's feelings. In the 1960s, when Martin Luther King stood up in Washington, looked out on a crowd of 100,000 people, and started a speech with the words, "I have a dream." He talked to people who weren't just Black and in America. He talked to people who were white, who were Black, who were brown, who were every color, both genders, high and low, rich and poor. He talked to people's deepest yearnings for a world where people accepted each other for who they were, accepted each other's character, didn't just deal in stereotypes and writing people off with superficial assessments of who they were. What he did was he talked about looking deeply into each other, He also was talking to the unspoken concerns or feelings of an entire generation. And his words, generations later, continue to reverberate across the face of the earth. I have a dream. So many people have a dream for better circumstances, where prejudice, where hatred, where war are no longer realities, and where all peoples of the earth are able to live together in peace, with equity, and with positive interactions, and the hope for a world for our children that will be better than the world that we've grown up in. Those words, I have a dream, spoke to our better selves. They went right into our unspoken concerns or feelings. And what happened in that speech? At a deeper level, the highest level, Martin Luther King was understanding those issues and concerns that are between the lines of our lives. Those things we may not say out loud, but we feel, and we feel deeply, which affect us every day of our lives, our deepest, deepest yearnings. So in one single speech, that man did so many different things, and it all started with empathy, stretching out with his heart to try to imagine his way into the world with experience of what it felt like, of people who were oppressed, downtrodden, defenseless, had no voice, felt that no one was their advocate, no one could speak up for them and give them a life that was filled with less pain and more joy. Now, I want to remind you, when we think about emotions, we might want to very simplistically write them off as happy, sad, glad, mad. But there are more than five. There are five emotions and more variations on all those emotions than you ever could have imagined. 100 variations. And just think about that. You're having a project team meeting, or you're meeting with your department and your boss. Someone in that room could be excited. Someone in that table could be very frustrated. Someone could be feeling quite worthless. Someone could be fearful because they don't know what's going to happen to them. In some instances, you have people feeling two emotions at the same time that might be quite opposite. Somebody might be feeling somewhat worthless and unable to meet the needs and the expectations, while at the same time they have a sense of being gratified that somebody has looked to give them a more complex piece of work or a more complex project. And we know as human beings, we're complex creatures. You don't just have one emotion at any given point in time. We may have multiple emotions going on at the same time. So if you don't think emotions are important, you look around the table of your project team or your group of staff that might be your peers or your employees, and you don't try to reflect on how are people feeling as a team overall. How are the individuals around the table feeling right now? Emotions are not just things that are out of control, hard to grapple with, and cannot be measured. Emotions are data. Data. The great resignation that is happening around the world today is because of the fact that people have not read the data of the emotions affecting the staff, who, out of disappointment and a feeling of hopelessness, have stood up and walked out of companies and organizations worldwide in the millions. That's all a matter of failure to read the emotions. No opportunities, no chances for advancement, nothing to address the sense of depression or sadness or disappointment that people are feeling. Those emotions have not been addressed. And so people have decided to move and to go to other jobs. That's an emotional problem. It's leading to massive opportunities worldwide and all kinds of problems around employee gaps and companies that are losing their resources. But ultimately, if leaders look after the emotional state of their staff and try their best to work with those emotions, the chances of retaining their staff are much better. So the great resignation happening around the world today has been triggered by feelings and emotions. Do you still think emotions are not important? Do you still think because they can't be measured with an instrument like some kind of caliper that therefore they're not significant? Well, you just look around you in your workplace and count the people who've left and the new people who have joined because they left somewhere else as part of the Great Resignation. And ask yourself the question again: are emotions important or not important in the workplace? Well, if we were to talk about what are the components of empathy, what is it made of, we'd have the following conversation. We would start with the components of emotional intelligence as a whole, and that factors down to understanding where people are coming from, their motivations, their words and behaviors, and the ability to identify with their emotions and know what they're feeling. It's also about compassionate suspension of judgment, and it's about taking action motivated by respect and consideration. Okay? Now, overall, the action of understanding, being aware of, and being sensitive to, and also remotely experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another person, either in the past or the present, without having their precise feelings, thoughts, and experience fully communicated to you, that's what empathy is all about. Important as a component of emotional intelligence. Now, look at this. Do the opposite of that. Do the opposite of that in an interaction with an individual or a team. Go in and have no clue where the people are coming from, what's motivating their words and their behavior. Don't even bother to identify their emotions, because that's not important. It's stupid. Emotions are stupid. Why should I bother to identify those? Don't have a suspension of your judgment. Start making judgments about the team, its intelligence, whether or not it's committed. Is it actually a worthwhile team? Should we get rid of them all? Go in there with that attitude and make sure your actions are not motivated by respect and consideration. What do you think is going to happen to you? Well, they are going to toss you out the door first chance they get in a leadership review. That's what's going to happen to you. And for people who manage in the opposite way to these things, they are dying like dinosaurs and turning into fossils. It's a generation that's passing off the scene. Thank goodness leaders like that are no longer going to be around, because leaders like that are fools. They are absolutely idiotic leaders with no comprehension of the way to motivate staff and retain staff. And the faster they get deep sixed and booted out the door, the better it is for organizations today. Empathy is a foundation skill for every kind of social competence that's important at work. It's about understanding others. But it's not just understanding people to manipulate people, because there are leaders in history who have been incredibly empathetic and totally evil in the use of their empathy, their ability to feel other people's feelings. You just need to think of somebody like Adolf Hitler, a horrible leader, and yet he had a depth of comprehension of people and what would move them to action. Then you look at his opposite, somebody like Martin Luther King, and his ability to motivate people not to hatred, not to murder, but to love and to peace. So we don't just understand people to manipulate them, but to serve, to understand and to meet the needs of the people that we serve and look after. And who are your customers? Well, if you're a project manager, it's all your stakeholders. They're all your customers. If you're a manager, your staff are your customers. And the people that you serve, your management, are also your customers. Empathy is not just about understanding and serving, it's about developing others, reaching in to see all the potential of the members of the team that you may be leading as a PM, and pushing those potentials to develop the individuals who have them, and also having as diverse a group of people. The biggest mistake managers can ever make is to hire a bunch of people who think exactly like them, and who look like them. It's a foolish thing to do. Have as diverse, as rich a group of individuals in your team as you can, because the more diverse the ideas are based on diverse backgrounds, the better the decision-making process is. The greater the results of the team are, and the greater the results you have as a leader. And empathy is also about political awareness. It's about seeing how power moves up and down politically and in social currents in a family, in an organization, in a community, and having the clear-eyed ability to work with the politics, When you're developing your empathy, listen and pay attention. Look at the person. Don't look at your phone. Nod to show that you understand what they're saying. It's not necessarily that you agree, but you're building rapport with them. Ask the person to repeat something or to clarify or to explain further. And one of the richest expressions we can use with anyone is tell me more. Tell me more about that. Tell me more. Because it opens people up to you. It demonstrates to them that you care, that you're considerate, and that you really and truly want to understand who they are and where they're coming from, which after all is how we develop our empathy. And ask also for follow-up details so you build that rapport more and more. Don't judge. Do not judge the people that you work with. Accept them as they are. If there are behaviors that need to change, well, confront those behaviors. If there are attitudes that need to be different, confront those attitudes. But remember, don't be a judge. In other words, don't condemn, discount, and reject people based on superficial assessments of who they are, what their background is, what their ethnicity might be, and other things that we use to judge people. And instead, open your mind and heart to people as they are, to work with them and to get the best from them. Be able to shift your point of view. Don't say, well, I am who I am, man. This is the way I think. You just have to deal with it, man. That's just the way I am. Because that also is an indicator of very low levels of intelligence and high levels of failure. Be able to stand in people's shoes. It means you have to stop. You have to think. You've got to reflect. And then you need to demonstrate that you understand where they're coming from. Remember that woman at the table and all her disappointments and the anger she felt. And see yourself after the meeting going up to her and saying, Josie, I just wanted to say, I imagine that meeting was a tough one. All the words that were being said about employee engagement and promotions and so on and so forth. And I know you've not been treated well. I just want to let you know I respect what you do, and I'm here as part of your fan club because I really feel you need to be in a higher level role. Now, what you've done there is you've stood in her shoes, you've stopped and reflected, and you've shown that you understand. What did that cost you? $5, $100, 20 euros? It cost you nothing but compassion, respectfulness, and human kindness. And for goodness sake, whatever you do, don't show fake emotions. People are not stupid. They look at that fake smile, they see your eyes are not smiling, and they know you're not genuinely expressing to them what you actually feel. Have you ever seen people who are incredibly enraged and yet they've painted a smile on their face? It's almost as if they can't even admit to themselves that they're angry. And because they haven't admitted to themselves that they're angry, what they will do is they will go out there and they will act in ways that are just not the best way to behave with people, trying to undermine them behind their backs, expressing their rage by ways of eroding their peers and their colleagues, passive aggressive behavior. That's all about fake emotions. When we need to have the courage to stop and say, no, hang on, Joe. I have to confess what you've just said to me irritates me. I could be wrong, but let me explain why it irritates me. By honestly talking through our emotions, we have the highest chance of being able to end with good rapport and a heightened sense of empathy towards the people we're interacting with. Don't fake your emotions. Now, I am going to stop here. I'm going to ask you for a few minutes to share some experiences that you might have. Can anyone tell me how your empathy has changed over the last few years? Has it grown? Are you finding it difficult to develop it? And also any of these other questions that are on the screen. If anybody would like to share for a few minutes before I turn things back over to Sylvia, let's say we'll stop at 1/4 and then turn it over to Sylvia to manage the question period. So share. Anybody who wants to share anything on these questions. Don't be shy. Can any of you remember someone that you've seen using empathy effectively? And can you tell us a story about it?
Hi there, my name is Alexander. I would like to say something, if possible. Well, I was listening everything you said, and I kind of liked the most the part where you were saying that you know, in general, people are more or less feeling, or they have same. Well, we all have problems sometimes in our lives, and we go through different situations. And I've been a project manager for more than 10 years now. In my career, I've been assigned to a project with a multinational team, and I always had problems with the Italian guy there. Nothing personal against the Italians, but he was just, sorry to say, but pain in the ass. And I always failed to understand why, and I always had difficulties talking to him. And one day, I think we just by accident had lunch together, and he kind of mentioned some personal issues there and problems in his personal life. And of course, that first of all brought us together. And I could also see that he's not just a random asshole, or he's just another human being with issues in his life. And obviously, that also has an effect on his career and the way he handles work. And that definitely helped for me to understand him and to more, how to say, I haven't been so angry at him after this conversation. And it was just like 20, 25 minutes conversation just for lunch. You know, it was just outside of the box. So that completely changed the whole communication I had with him afterwards.
You know, I couldn't have asked for a better story to illustrate everything we've just talked about, Alexander. That was wonderful. So 25 minutes completely transformed your relationship with another person where things previously had been really difficult. That's amazing. That's amazing. Does anyone else have a story they'd like to share about empathy? Yeah. Now, Alexander's story just told us about empathy, turning a tough situation around. Rapport was built over a deeper understanding of where the other person was coming from, their challenges. Great story. Anyone else? How many people have we got on this call? 5? No one else? You're too shy?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, yes, indeed.
Yes. I tried to raise my hand, but I guess you can see the hand raising. I would like to give example of a situation, the third example, where not using empathy has led to a result that was not the best. I have a friend who was appointed to work as project manager, a middle-level project manager on a big project at work. And at first he was very enthusiastic and he really tried to learn, to do professional development, to fulfill his responsibilities and to lead the project correctly. However, when he started noticing some discrepancies and some issues with the project that related primarily to politics and communication between the sponsor and the upper level management, he started raising these issues, and the upper management had a very cold, very non-responsive reaction. They tried to ignore the issues. They didn't address his concerns, and he felt very demotivated. His motivation dropped drastically over the months, and at the moment he is completely unengaged in the project. And I would say that he actually got sick at one point and suffered from mild depression and started taking medications because that triggered a very high degree. He felt that he was not appreciated, that his opinion was not valued, and that basically, yeah, he just felt completely brushed off and unappreciated. And I think that in some situations, when there is not open communication and the goals are not aligned, plus lack of complete empathy, the result could be detrimental for the project success and for the motivation of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very fine comment. It's absolutely true. And I really feel for your colleague. And you know, when we think in terms of empathy, it's not just that we empathize with people around us. We have to also have a degree of compassion for ourselves. Sometimes situations, projects, circumstances, jobs can become so negative. They can be so demotivating, and at times they can be debilitating, that they put us into, like your colleague, a period of situational depression. And we have to break away in order to pull ourselves back together again. So make sure that you're able to treat yourself with kindness, to have empathy towards yourself likewise, as you grow to learn your tolerance levels, what triggers you, and also what can harm you emotionally too. That's an important part of emotional intelligence. But thank you for that story clearly. The lack of empathy was expressed towards him, and that had the effect of really eroding his sense of worth and value, and putting into a very bad state emotionally. I think we have time for one more comment, one last comment. Does anyone have one? Or
Hi, Dev. If I may chime in.
yes.
My name is Georgi. First of all, I'd like to compliment you on being such an eloquent speaker. It was a pleasure listening to your presentation. I'd like to switch things around for my comment, if I may. I believe I've had situations where I've had too much of an emphatical reaction to different situations, and I would like you to maybe expand on this or provide some advice to all of us. I've had situations where I wasn't entirely happy with the work being performed, or with someone's attitude or comments, etc. And I've always tried to think about what would motivate them to not perform? Why would they be demotivated? Why would they have negative emotions or negative comments or anything that might be regarded as such? And I've always tried to think about information that I don't have in front of me. They may have some personal issues, or they may be dealing with non-work related stuff at the moment, and so on and so on. And I've come to realize that there have been situations in the past where this has maybe made me not to speak my mind in the precise moment that I should have. And through experience, I've learned to better balance my reactions in these situations. But could you give us some advice on how to better balance our emphatical reactions to other people we work with? Thank you.
That's a really, really good question, Georgi. And I think one of the ways to really be able to gauge how best to respond to emotions that you see around the table with a group of people is, if possible, it's not always possible, have some social time with individuals in your project team. Take them out for a coffee, have a lunch with them. Remember the story that Alexander told us. It was a lunch that happened by chance over 25 minutes that totally transformed his understanding of the other person and their relationship and their partnership as a couple of peers. So in the same way, if possible, try to get that social time with the people that you work with, so you get to know them and they get to know you. And you're able then to go into those meetings with a better level of rapport than you might have had otherwise. If you don't have that chance, and all that you've got is the in the moment sort of experience of things are happening around the table and you're trying to decode what's going on. And it might be, for instance, emotions that are going on where you've got two department representatives at each other's throats. So it might be development and testing, for instance. It might be sales and marketing. It might be who knows what. But you've got people on either side of a fence battering away at each other. What sometimes helps is if you just say, look, I want everyone to pause and stop for a minute and think through what I'm about to say. I'm sensing some strong emotions around the table. There's a significant amount of hostility that people are expressing. And what I want to do is observe that that's happening. I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying that's what's coming out of the table. Now, what we have to do instead is think in terms of what is the problem that we have to address, and what are people's ideas on how to address that problem. If we can pull our emotions back in and keep them under control and focus on the issue, not the other person, not how they failed, not what a rotten colleague they are to work with, not how they're always screwing everything up and before they hand it off to us, everything is a mess and we have to clean it up. Lay all that aside. Let's look very specifically at the problem that's in front of us right now. Now, that may not please everybody, and the two combatants who may really enjoy going at each other's throats won't like it, but there'll be enough support, hopefully, around the table to calm things down and to refocus attention on what needs to be focused on. If things get so intense that it's not possible to make progress in the meeting, end it. And say this in the meeting, I would recommend. Right now, there are some interactions going around the table which are making it impossible for us to have this meeting. So I'm going to close this meeting and we'll rebook it to another day and another time. And what I will ask everyone to do is come to the table with a solutions focus, with an absence of hostility and accusation, so that we can have a productive meeting. Because frankly, We're now losing an hour we needed to have to work things through. Unless, of course, people are in agreement around this table that we can continue the meeting and there will be no more quarreling at the table. And if people are willing to accept that, you can continue the meeting. If not, you've just given a message to them. You, two people, or however many people, have just destroyed an opportunity for us to do some constructive work together. This is not going to happen again. So I have an expectation that when you come back to the next meeting, that kind of behavior will not recur. And let them know too. I just want everyone to know too that that if you need me to talk to your leaders to see if I can work with them to provide you the support you need so that these meetings can be constructive, just say the word as it is. I'm following up with a couple leaders after this meeting. So you see, emotional intelligence is not softy and wafty and floppy and something that is like cotton candy. Emotional intelligence can also be tough and direct in reading the emotions, seeing their impact to the team, and putting a stop to it. That's also a part of emotional intelligence. Georgi, I am conscious of the fact that I haven't answered your question, but hopefully out of all of that mess of words, 2 or 3 might have been useful to you. I'll turn things back over to Sylvia now.
Thank you, Dev. Very interesting presentation as always. And thank you for engaging our audience again. I saw one question in the chat. It is a long explanation, so I can read it for you. It is from Step Kanasheva. Most of my projects are done by external resources remotely who are not located at the same location. We have project calls where we discuss the project status. Usually we don't have to for personal talks. It is difficult to read the emotions on virtual calls, no cameras on. How can we improve the reading of the emotions in that environment?
That's a good question. And first, you need to ask everyone to put their cameras on. Especially if you're dealing with remote teams, it's important to be able to see people, to gauge their responses, to watch their body language, because that's the majority of communications, not what we actually say. So get people to agree to have their cameras on. In addition to that, tee up one-on-one calls between you and the remote members, and just make them getting to know you calls. How are things going calls, where you get to talk to them as individuals and learn who they are. Now, there's also a cultural aspect to this. I remember once leading an international project where we had developers in India, we had testers in China, and we also had some additional quality people who were in Russia. Now, you're dealing with vastly different cultures and vastly different ways of engaging with people. So what would happen is one person from a particular country would talk about how crappy everything was and how rotten the code is, and he can't believe that these people have the qualifications they do given the work that they generate. So the people in China lost face, and the people in India went absolutely quiet. So there's a disaster going on. People weren't understanding each other's cultural norms. I'll give you another example. There was one guy, Ravi, in India, and he was ensuring that stuff was going to be promoted to production on the weekend, the upcoming weekend. So I said, Ravi, so everything's good. Now I'm Indian in my background, but I was born in Canada and my parents are from Trinidad. So there's all kinds of filtering of Indian going on there, right? Which means I'm not a regular Indian. But the Indian a leader in India, when I asked him, is everything okay for the weekend? This is what he said to me. Oh, yes, everything is fine. You know, another team had a project like this and they needed more time, but I think we're good. I think we're good for the weekend. So Monday rolls around and I'm assuming everything is going to be okay and happen as it should. Monday morning, it didn't go to production. So I call him Ravi and said, what happened? And he said, I told you we might have a delay. And I'm trying to remember the conversation. He never came right out and said there's going to be a delay, because in India, people have a difficulty saying no to a boss. So they say no in a way that is so indirect that you have to pick it up and another project had a problem with that and needed more time. That means they need more time and they're not going to get it done, right? But I didn't know enough to know that. And he's looking at me, you're an Indian, how could you not have known? Because he didn't know my kind of cultural journey, which lost my ability to pick up very subtle signs like that. So I realized, one, I'm having difficulty understanding people of all these different cultures and how they relate to each other. And two, it's my responsibility to start reaching out to them individually and getting to know them. So I connected with my colleague in Russia, my colleagues in China, my colleagues in India, and got to know them, and got them used to speaking their mind where people didn't speak their mind, and where people were used to speaking their mind, toning it down a little bit. Now, I can't say the results were perfect, but boy, they were a lot less bad than they were when we originally started. So that's also an exercise in empathy, stopping to realize what we can do to help and change circumstances, and reaching out for those one-on-one moments where we can develop empathy, understand each other, and more effectively. So I knew from then on, if my Chinese team went quiet, draw them out, pull them out, and try to imagine what's keeping them quiet right now, right? And with our Indian team, and then more questions, to really get to the point where I have an actual answer, as opposed to an indirect indicator of what an answer might be. I needed direct answers to be able to understand what was going on. So I hope that was useful to you.
Thank you. There is another question from Maria Kalcheva-Hinkova. What do you do if you sense there is an issue, probably personal, affecting performance, but in one-to-one conversation, the person says all is fine?
Okay. Now that's a trust issue. And if your gut is telling you there's something there, chances are there is. Now, gut isn't scientific. You can't measure it, right? Well, let me tell you what gut is, a gut feeling. A gut feeling is an echo response. It's a feeling that I think this is what's going on based on my previous experiences that I've had. That's what your gut instinct is. It's not some mindless, stupid interpretation. It's a feeling that this feels like a previous situation, and I think something is going on, and I sense it is, even though the person's not giving me the answer. So go with your gut if it's telling you something. But then remember, it takes time to establish trust with another colleague. So you talk to Bob, and Bob says, everything's fine, I'm okay. Then what you can say to Bob is this: Bob, I'm sorry, I didn't want to intrude, but I tell you this. If ever you feel you need to just talk and have it completely confidential so it never goes beyond me, I do this with a lot of colleagues, and I'm happy to do it for you too, just to be there. And I hope you would be there for me too, as I struggle. And I'm struggling with something right now. I'm having a problem with my teenage son, but I'm just trying to focus on the job to get things done, even though this is such a problem for me right now. And by taking that risk to share something that gives Bob a sense that you are willing to be vulnerable with him, he might over time be willing to be vulnerable with you. But if he is vulnerable, he does share with you, do not betray that confidence. Don't betray the confidence. Do not gossip. Do not go out there and talk about these things. There are only two times you have to betray that confidence. One, Bob is going to harm someone. Two, Bob is going to harm himself. And if those two things are going to happen, you break your word and you get him to safety. Right? You get the call into emergency services or whatever you need to get to, so that the support can be there. But for every other circumstance, you keep that confidence, because one of the worst things you can do to another human being is persuade them to trust you when they have difficulty trusting, and then betraying that trust. Think of what you've just done to them. Any other questions, Sylvia?
They aren't in. Wait a moment. Yes, just another came in. How will this classification of the 4 different personality types impact the communication on the team with regards to empathy?
Tell me more about the different personality types you refer. What personality types? What model are you referring to?
This is Albena Ivanova. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So there are different type of classifications. DISC is the most popular that I think they use in project management. But in general, the 4 personality styles relate to the 4 temperaments, melancholic, phlegmatic, choleric, and sanguinic. So the people that are with the highest level of empathy are the melancholic type because they're very supportive as leaders and as followers. So the people that are, I believe, phlegmatic are with on a lower scope of empathy. So our personality impacts the degree to which we empathize with people, but also the leadership style of the project manager is different. So, and then I will overlap another question. The cultural difference, which you mentioned, you have cultures with a higher power distance where sharing emotions is not considered professional at work and people don't feel comfortable sharing, whereas other cultures, they feel more comfortable. So we have the cultural aspect and the personality aspect that will moderate the empathy level between two people or empathy impact of the communication. And I was wondering if you have any comments on this. Thank you.
Okay, it's a complex question. So you're referring to, I think, Gert Hofstadter's culture consequences, which is his assessment of consequences around the world and how they tend to interact with each other, levels of power, power distancing, the effect that it has in different cultures. And you're also referring to the fact that there are different models for personality profiling. You referred to 1 or 2. There must be about 8 or 9 key ones that are available out there. I am certified in about 3 different instruments right now. But the bottom line is this. All of those things are going to affect one's natural environmental ability to be empathetic. Some cultures are going to naturally have more empathy easily than others. Absolutely true. But the bottom line is this. That's only if we are looking at empathy as some kind of an innate characteristic that's in us and that's environmentally developed. What I'm talking about is consciously developed empathy. It's deliberate, intentional self-evaluation of our empathy levels saying, for me to be more effective, I need to understand people better. And I'll cite the example about the international team I had where it became very clear to me my empathy levels weren't deep enough to be able to accommodate such diverse cultures and be able to work effectively with them. I could say, for instance, that according to the Myers-Briggs assessment, I am an INFJ, and therefore, as a consequence, I'm able to do this, that, or the other, and certain things are more natural to me, other things are not. But what that does, the upside is you have a better understanding of yourself as an individual right now. The downside is you think, well, that locks out change, development, and flexing who I am as an individual. So if I'm an ENTJ, the commander, militaristic, I have to be the person in control, and according to that assessment in Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ, therefore I'm going to have low levels of empathy. Well, even if that's true, I still have to stop and mindfully and intentionally develop the levels of empathy I need to be a highly effective leader. All right. So personality profiles, phlegmatic, etc., these things give us great insights into ourselves, but don't allow them to lock you in a box so that you think, well, I'm not able to be empathetic because I am this profile. That's not so. You use the profiling to give you insights into who you are as an individual, a leader, and a person. But at the same time, you then say, okay, because I'm such and such a profile tendency, I may have to work a little bit harder to develop empathy, but I still have to develop it. It's like saying, I don't know how to use a computer, but I'm a great leader. Well, okay, you don't know how to use a computer, but you're going to have to learn how, or you're not going to be able to cope in this world. So think about empathy as a skill set the same way. You know, I'm an ENTJ. I'm a commanding personality. I have to be in control. I have to be the boss. I have to be telling everybody what to do. And I'm not so good at empathy, so I'm not going to bother about that. Well, you have to be, because it's like a computer. It is a necessary, vital skill set anyone can develop, and no one is born with inherently. And as time goes by, we get better and better at it. I know that was a long-winded answer, but it was a complex question that was actually interleaving multiple intellectual disciplines in a way that it had to be a longer answer. So I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the interesting questions. There is another one, Dev, again from Maria Kalcheva-Hienkova. Thank you for bringing up these questions. How do we coach, influence a person who only sees things from his own perspective to give empathy a try?
Do a little bit exploration of his personal relationships. If he's willing to talk to you about it, say, tell me, have you struggled with being able to relate to or have empathy for people in your family or people around you? My brother, yeah, he's an idiot. He got stupid things all the time. Okay, all right. And when you interact with him, how do you talk to him? I usually don't talk to him. Okay, so and you ask additional questions, and you stop at some point in time when enough data has come out and say, tell me, do you think maybe spending a little bit of time developing a sense of why people are the way they are, who they are as individuals, and how you can best interact with them might be worth a try? I don't know. I don't know if that's important. Well, tell me, is it affecting your work right now? Here's the feedback I'm getting. Roger doesn't give a damn about anybody else's problems, concerns, or areas of focus. All he cares about is get in the meeting, get what he wants, get out of the meeting. Nobody wants to work with people who behave this way. And Roger, I know you might get mad, but I'm telling you something everyone else is afraid to tell you. You've got the ability and the potential to deepen your empathy with other people. If you do, it will unlock a whole new range of possibilities for solutions, issue management, risk management, transparency about what's going on in the project or at the table, and you being seen as someone who is a colleague other people really want to work with. You've got high intelligence, you're very articulate, you're a strong-minded person. But if you can complement it with those soft skills that are the hardest skills a person can have, you will be absolutely unbeatable and an unbelievably great colleague. Now that approach is multi-pronged. You're working with the individual's ego. You're looking for areas that you can get in by gauging their level of success in multiple areas of their lives and the impact that lack of empathy has had. You are connecting a possible future of greater success to the requests that you're making of them now. If they still beat you down, fight you, and refuse to, you've done what you can. Walk away and don't beat yourself up over it.
Thank you, Dev. There is a question or a comment from Hajer El Aisi. I'm sorry if I pronounce it not correctly. Is empathy related to human culture or we can learn it?
It's a learned skill. It's a great question. People assume it's a thing you're born with. You know, my brother is really empathetic. You know, I'm the math guy. What? There's no connection between those two thoughts, but it's the way people tend to see things. You are not born with empathy. You develop it. You're not born emotionally intelligent. You develop it. Think about it this way. You're a 6-year-old girl in your family. You have a mom, a dad. You have a brother and a sister. You have grandparents. You've got aunts and uncles. You've got neighbors. You've got kids of the neighbors. You've got teachers at school and a battalion of kids at school. And you learn without even knowing you're doing it. How do I relate and adjust my interaction with each person so that I get the best results? Your dad is a softie. You've got him around your little finger. He will say yes to anything you ask him for. Your mom is strict and she's a hard case to work with. So you prepare facts and details and a good reason why you're asking her for what you're asking her and what you're going to do to earn that thing you're asked, the money or the toy or whatever. You're going to do this in your room and do that in the backyard and so on and so forth. And now you have almost like an agreement with your mother. You didn't have to do that with your dad. You just, Daddy, can I have such and such? Oh, no problem. And you get it. So what have you done? At 6 years of age, you have learned emotionally intelligent, diverse ways of communicating and interacting based on the individual and empathy for them. My mom has to have facts and data. She's not about hugs and kisses and spoiling me. I have to come to her in a particular way. With my dad, I can be a different me. So that's a skill that's developed by a little kid. So for us as men and women, as grown-ups, as elders, because I'm an elder, I'm 60 years old. 60. I'm an old fool now. I was a young fool once, not anymore. So at this stage of our lives, we learn and we focus on developing these skills. It's not stuff you're born with or culture. It's learning something you value is an important thing to know and to know how to do. Back to you, Sylvia.
There are no more questions. We can wait a little bit. We have more time. So please feel free to get advice from Dev how to act in different situations. Okay, so there is something that came in from Steph Kanasheva. It looks to me that empathy, providing on-time feedback, and unconscious bias are very connected.
I don't know so much if they're connected. Developing empathy is about eroding and undermining your unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is based on stereotypes that we've grown up with. We make a judgment about a race or a gender or a country or a people of a certain level of society, and that's who they are, and they're all the same, and we lump them in together, and without ever saying it out loud, in our mind, there's an unconscious bias towards individuals. So if we're interacting with one of those people from that group that we tend to not have a lot of rapport with or respect for, we will treat them differently. What empathy is about is saying, nope, I'm not going with all that anymore. I'm going to look at people as unique individuals with all kinds of strengths, all kinds of richness that I can learn from and help develop, and that can develop me. And I'm now going to change how I look at these people. So unconscious bias locks people down and diminishes them. Empathy opens people up and enlarges who they are and who you are as an individual likewise.
There is another question from Hajer El Aisi. What is the relation between the agile mindset to be able to be empathetic, maybe? There are two, let me see, and the empathy.
Right.
Able to
now,
be
nobody's ever asked me that question. I've never even considered the answer to that question, ever. So let's do it net new. If an agile mindset is about resilience, adaptiveness, if it's about coming up with ways to address things in a way that takes a major problem and chunks it into smaller parts, If it's about increasing speed to deliver results, then think of what empathy does in helping you to do that. Empathy is about knowing the potential, the ability, the background, and the power of the individuals that you interact with. If you know your team deeply through an ongoing effort to develop and strengthen your rapport and your empathy with them, then agility is something that you can now assess more accurately, because you know what the team can deliver. You know how fast they can assemble together. You know how quick it is to put together pods or to do scrums or whatever needs to be done. Or if you're looking at organizational agility, you can speed the process of decision making and delivering results with a more accurate assessment of who your people are. And that comes through developing your empathy with them and increasing your understanding of what their capacity to deliver is all about, which you would never know if you didn't know them really well, and if you hadn't taken the time to develop your empathy towards them. Hope that helped.
Yeah, I wait for other questions to come in or comments. Or if someone is willing, you can unmute your mic and just have a discussion with Dev. I would like that we tap into his vast experience in this field, so that tomorrow we are better equipped in dealing with our teams.
I think they're probably tired out now, Sylvia.
Yeah. I can probably share an experience or observation that I have had over the time, and also based on some reading that I have done. It looks like in most situations, let's say there is some kind of situation that pictures frustration or anger on the other side. In most, it seems like this has deep roots into our childhood usually. So it doesn't have to deal necessarily with you. So what I understood is that in quite a lot of situations, by saying something, by our intonation, we can trigger something in the other person that actually doesn't have to do with us personally. It's just, it evokes a memory from the unconscious, and the person is triggered in a certain way that comes to us like an anger, like a frustration, and then you start asking yourself, wow, what have I done? How can I react to it in a better way? So you start looking for reasons in you. I don't know if you have had this experience, whether your research has come to the same conclusion, but to me it seems most like, because we have developed our emotional intelligence skills mostly in the childhood, so we have programmed already certain reactions to certain environment stimuli, and then when we are in the same environment, even if it's not the same reality anymore, we act again in this way. So maybe this can give us more understanding. So we are more, so we don't take it personal all the time. Of course, we have to explore also what we have done in the situation. But according to my experience, it usually doesn't have to do with us. It's mostly related to the other person.
Beautiful observation, Sylvia. They're very, very valid. Childhood conditions or establishes a context out of which adulthood comes. And if we've had difficult interactions with specific individuals who had a major impact on our early lives, then ways of speaking, phrases that people use, tones of voice, sometimes it might even be a facial resemblance to the individual, can trigger in us a position towards that individual that sometimes can be negative. And if you are on the receiving end of something like that, for instance, you're in a meeting and somebody says something and you say, well, I'm not sure I agree with that. And they blow up all over the place. And you stop and think, oh, what just happened? It could be that in their childhood, in school, at home, I'm not sure I agree with that, led to some major traumatizing discipline or humiliation and laughter at their expense that caused them to feel so beaten down and diminished as a child that now when they hear that again in adult life, it causes a major response. I remember there was a woman who I worked with years and years ago, who was triggered by the word lady. So somebody said, yeah, I was talking to this lady and she said to me, what? And it would be a massive meltdown and quarrel. And the person was in total shock and they didn't know what they had done. So if you receive that kind of treatment from someone, break away. You may not be able at the time to think it through because the avalanche of emotion can be so significant that you just don't have time to think. But when you break away, especially if you're a highly sensitive individual or someone who finds you get hurt easily, it's hard to let it go. Get in front of a little piece of paper and start writing some stuff down. What happened? Write down the facts. What did I say? What was the response? Now, how did I interpret it? Well, one interpretation, I'm a terrible person and I broke something or someone. Second, unintentionally, I triggered something, but I don't know what it is or where it came from. Third, the person's having a terrible day and I just happened to be the individual who was the last straw and said something that allowed them to vent their entire frustration of the week or the day in that one little conversation. And then fourth, you ask yourself, well, what are my options for what I do next? And your options could be reach out to the person to grab a coffee and say, let's talk. I never intended to cause you to be upset when I said what I said, but what happened? What did I do? Or what could have been done differently? Why did you respond the way you did? That then brokers an interaction where you hear, for instance, the person, their wife has now been given a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer, and only has a couple of years potentially and very poor possibilities around treatment. And then you stop, you think, good grief, man, that was me. Wow. Okay. Now you are building an understanding, an empathy, or maybe they never tell you what it was, but at least they've noted you took the time, you respected them enough, and you cared enough to sit with them, to ask them what might be going on and how can I do things differently, right? These situations are never easy and they're never simple. They're always complex, but there's approaches that we can take that help us to feel, I've cleared my system out on this issue. I think I've done everything I can to make it right, and now I can move on.
Thank you.
7 minutes left, and we retained 73 people. That's awesome.
Yes, Dev, thank you. Thank you. I know you're always very engaging.
It's just a subject. It's not me, for sure. It's the subject. It's a subject people are really interested in today.
Yes, it is true. Yes, so let's wait 1 more minute. Maybe some other question may come in. Nevertheless, in the meantime, I would like to extend my gratitude for being together, for joining us in this conversation, for asking all these questions. And I believe we'll leave this session with some more instruments of how we can talk, of how we can go into certain situations. And of course, It's not only because of the topic, but because of the speaker as well. Yes, thank you, Dev. This is a compliment for you. From Marino. Thank you, Brain. Yes. Yeah, I believe we are more aware now of how we can deal in certain situations we have been into, but now we have a better understanding of how we can approach them when they next develop or when we next encounter them. Would you like to conclude something, Dev?
Yes, empathy is an absolute superpower. And the greatest that we can be as individuals is to be individuals who have enough empathy to comprehend people so profoundly different to ourselves that we're able to respect and have compassion for them and to help them to be their better selves in the world and in the projects and in the workplaces that we find ourselves in. So use this skill, but remember it's a power, and every superpower can be used wrongly. Make the best possible use of it.
Thank you. Having said all that, thank you, Dev, for the amazing session. So there are a lot of thank you notes now. Thank you from Stefka. Yes, thank you all. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you for joining us. Without the audience, the session would not be as it was. And of course, also the speaker contributed to a big degree to having a very insightful conversation about really very difficult topics. Yes, I'll stop the recording.